This is something I didn't realize the severity of till I was older. My mom had left me and my brother home alone. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13, so I was 9 years old. Watching him play Xbox in our living room, he had his headset on talking to his friends. There was a knock from the door on our carport. I run and answer the door without looking. It's a grown man I've never seen before. We are separated by the screen door, which at the time was unlocked. He asks, "Are your parents home?" Horror washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the carport, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on our front door, right? And our carport is empty. We only had one car and my mother had taken it. This man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid. I don't know why, but I am scared. Immediately, my brother in the other room comes to mind. I've never had a father figure. My brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. The strongest person in the whole world. Someone who could protect me in any situation. How most people regard their father, I think. I feel as though I can barely speak. Wide-eyed, I manage to stutter out, "No, but, Big Brother here." Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. Like an act of God, divine intervention, an arm reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence, out into the carport, and closes the door behind him. The man tells my brother he was looking to buy some old swing set that was in our front yard at the time. My brother comes back in without saying anything to me, puts on his headset and continues playing. I sit down as well and continue watching him. I don't believe we ever told our mom. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it pretty much fades from my memory. But as I got older, it became one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. A few months back, I went on a date with a guy who seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't put my finger on where I've seen him before. I assume I might have met him on a night out. It was a last-minute thing, and I told him how I wasn't looking for anything, but it would be nice to hang out. That was a mistake. When I first met him, he seemed like an alright guy, but things quickly turned when we got to a restaurant. He didn't order, but I did, and he started saying about loving my curves and my body. I laughed it off, but I thought he was being a bit too forward. He could have put it nicely or kept that to himself. While having my food, he began telling me about how I was different from other girls because they don't give nice guys like him a chance. Red flags immediately going off, so I came up with a story that I could only be out for a little bit because my parents wanted me to dog sit. He bought it, but then proceeded to stare at my breasts and saying how he wished that he could see me without clothes on, even saying I should send him a picture. I told him I don't do that, and he was making me uncomfortable. He stopped, but then told me how he brought me a gift. He pulled out of his bag a bouquet of roses, which I guess I did think was sweet, and a bag of Tesco prawns. That confused me, and I burst out laughing. I asked why he got them, and he said he knew I liked tempura and prawns. But the thing is, I never once told him I did, so alarm bells were going off again. My head told me to run, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stayed until the time I said I had to go. So I had less than an hour left. Okay, I can do that. He kept talking, but started to scare me because he started guessing aspects of my life. The school I went to, what I was like as a kid, and what I am currently doing. He got every part right. It scared me because I had not told him any of this and haven't posted anything online about it. So I backed away and asked how he knew all of that information. Turned out his mother was one of my teachers in school, and he asked her everything she knew about me and looked online for anything about me currently. I don't know when he asked her, but at this point, I wanted to get out of there. And thank God for my mom. Not long after, I got a text from my mom asking how things were. He didn't see the text but saw it was my mom, and I just said, "Oh God, my mom and dad got the times wrong for the picture, so I have to go home now for my dog. I'm so sorry." The guy just accepted that and then started to walk me home. I said about only going halfway because I'm not comfortable with people knowing where I stay, but he then started insisting. He then dropped the bombshell that he knew that I stayed on X such and such road, but didn't know which house was mine. I told him that is really weird and that it creeped me out that he knew that. He claimed I told him, but I never tell people that. So I started to walk to the main road for my own safety, but he grabbed my hand and said he knew a shortcut. I told him I wasn't comfortable again, and he told me it was fine and basically dragged me to a quiet road. I was getting really scared when he stopped and shoved his tongue down my throat. I shoved him away and told him to stop it, and he apologized. That's when I noticed a stranger walking a dog coming, so I used that and said I needed to go and went to the main road. I thought I was safe, but no. The guy kept walking with me. I stopped and told him I wanted to part there and how it was nice to meet him again. He looked confused and said we have never met. He said about meeting on a night out just to get me to come. I then began saying, "Look, I have to go," when he cut me off, grabbed and pulled me near some bushes, saying, "Before you go, there's one more thing." I told him I needed to go and to let go of me, but he ignored it. The guy then pulled me, hurting my wrists, and kissed me again. He saw the bushes and said about having privacy, and I managed to shove him off and tell him no. He then grabbed me again and tried to take me to the bush, saying, "It'll only be a second," while I resisted. Some dog walkers came by and he stopped and pulled me to kiss me again, this time grabbing my breast. I shoved him and screamed. I said no, and just ran. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I thought he might have tried to do something to me. I kept looking back and he was nowhere to be seen. I ended up taking the long way home just in case. When I got in, I just started to cry. I thought something bad would have happened to me when I got a message from another account. It was him. He said about how lovely it was meeting me and how it was the best date ever, how I was the prettiest girl he'd ever kissed and that he would see me again, adding how he hoped I had a lovely time and that he showed me he was a gentleman, then adding how he was on my road. I just hid on the floor for the rest of the day. When I looked at his profile, I remembered where I had seen him before. He used to message my old Facebook account years ago with weird messages and creepy edits saying how he loved me. This whole event happened within an hour and a half. I had just turned 22 and was working F&B. They had just promoted me from server to behind the bar, and I couldn't be more excited. Now, being a young, somewhat attractive female in F&B, you get a lot of creeps. You learn to shrug them off almost as though they're not even being a creep, though. But that said, it takes a lot to creep me out. So I'm being trained behind the bar one night when this random guy comes in. I say random because you see the same people every day. He's probably late 40s or early 50s. He sits down, asks me some questions about some beers, and makes some general small talk. His first impression was polite and kind of chatty, but nothing out of the normal. He finishes his food and orders another beer, then his demeanor changed. He made a comment about how cute I was after I did something ditzy or clumsy. I laughed it off and made a dumb blonde joke. Then out of nowhere, "I could just kidnap you." Excuse me? Okay, that's awkward, but I don't want to make this a more awkward situation. I should joke it off. My dumb self responds, "I'm working a double. I wish I could get kidnapped." I messed up. "What are you doing after work? When do you get off?" I immediately become short with him, shutting him down, name-dropping my boyfriend left and freaking right. When I started name-dropping my boyfriend, He made it very clear that my boyfriend was nothing, that my boyfriend has nothing on him, etc. I was becoming rude at this point to this man, and he was still not letting up. I tried just ignoring him and staying away from that general area of the bar, but he would not stop calling me by name. When I go to check on him, if he didn't need anything, I'd walk away. But he wouldn't let me out of his sight, and his stare was predatory, and I kid you not, he would literally lick his lips when I looked his way. I finally admitted defeat and told the girl training me that I couldn't serve him anymore and that I refused to interact with him. She took over, and anytime he tried calling me over, she'd cut him off and be like, "Well, how can I help you?" I figured he got the hint because he stayed glued to his phone and avoided looking at me or anyone else. I got cut maybe an hour later. I grabbed my car key and walked out the back door and started walking to my car. I wasn't worried about anything until I started crossing the street and the voice inside my head started screaming, "Run!" I took off running to my car, but since you could see my driver's side from the back door, my inner voice told me to climb in through the passenger side. As I'm trying to climb into my driver's seat from the passenger side without being seen, I come to the realization that I'm being ridiculous. So I pop my head up and guess what? This idiot is right in front of my car. I almost ran him over, hauling it out of that parking lot. So that's the end of the story, right? Wrong. The next night I'm helping my manager with a catering order that's about to be picked up when the phone rings. So I answer the phone. "This is Fat Granddaddy, how can I help you?" "Hey, it's Greg. How are you, baby?" Fine." I had no idea who it was at this point. "I'm glad you answered the phone. I wasn't sure you were working tonight." You don't know who this is, do you?" "No." "It's Greg from last night, remember?" "Oh." It finally clicked, and I looked mortified, and my manager was mean-mugging me because I sounded like an idiot, and we needed to knock this order out. "So did you want to place an order to go?" "No, baby. I just wanted to make sure you were working. I'll see you soon." I hung up and my manager was like, "What was that?" So I told her everything about the night before. When he shows up, she had me point him out to her. He sits at the bar, tries to speak to me right off the bat, but the bartender intervenes immediately. Within 5 minutes of him showing up, the manager was not digging the vibes from him and the way he was watching me. She calls me over and tells me she's sending me home early. Now our restaurant has an upstairs for storage and offices. There are 2 staircases, one towards the back of the restaurant and one to the front. She tells me to grab my stuff and go to the back staircase. I totally understood what her plan was. I ran up the back stairs and halfway down the front. If you stand about halfway up the front staircase, you can pretty much see the whole restaurant, so I peek my head and my manager immediately waves me to hide back upstairs. A few minutes later, a kitchen guy comes up the stairs and grabs me and we go out the front door, and he walked me around the block to the back parking lot to my car. My manager caught me in the parking lot before I left. Basically, since the back staircase is near the back door, he thought I left and went to follow me out again. My manager confronted him and he was banned. And thankfully, I haven't seen him since. So right when I was fresh out of college, I managed to land myself a job with an engineering firm over in Pennsylvania. It kind of sucked having to move away from Rochester, New York, where all my friends and family were, but the salary this firm was offering was so sweet that I just couldn't turn it down. So I went online and got looking for apartments just outside of Philly, eventually finding an advert for a guy who was looking for a roommate for a super swanky apartment. I mean, this place was really nice, and I could get why the guy would be looking for a roommate to split the rent with, especially since he seemed to be a younger dude who was probably in a similar position as I was. However, I didn't have the time to drive down to actually look at the place or meet the guy in person, so I pretty much did all the arrangements by phone, which maybe, now that I look back on it, was my first big mistake. So I move in with this guy, Daryl, who was super chill and pretty much spent all day playing 2K since he worked nights. I figured that he must have had a pretty high-paying job, and since he had this huge flat-screen TV, lots of expensive clothes, a nice car, the works, really. We didn't talk all that much, since we were on such different schedules, but eventually, when I asked him exactly what it is that he did for a living, he gave some super vague answer about having some kind of accountancy job. And no matter how much I pressed him for details, he always gave some wishy-washy answer until he got tired of the questions and changed the subject. Like a lot of you reading this, I started to suspect that Daryl wasn't quite telling the truth about what he did for a living. Like not once did I see him wearing anything like a shirt and tie. All his clothes were super upmarket, sure, but they were all super casual. He also had a lot of visitors in the evenings before we left for work. At first, I figured they were just friends of his, but there were a handful he didn't seem all that close with. And every time they stopped by to see him, at some point they just scuffle off into Daryl's bedroom for a while, talking in hushed tones before the visitor eventually left. I knew something was going on, but as embarrassing as it is, back then I was pretty naive. Besides that, I really didn't think it was any of my business. The last thing I wanted to do was upset my new roommate and screw away such a sweet living arrangement. So, this one Saturday, I'm in the local 7-Eleven just like a block away from the apartment, when this dude comes up to me as I'm looking at coffee and asks me if I'm the guy who lives with Daryl. Obviously, I'm all like, yeah, good to see you, dude. I didn't recognize the guy, but I figured that he'd visited the apartment one time and I just couldn't quite remember his face. He's being all friendly and whatnot, making small talk about this and that before he asked if I know whether or not Daryl was at home right then. I told him I didn't know, but that since it was like mid-afternoon that he probably was since he worked nights, whatever that entailed. And the guy's all like, okay, cool, I might stop by and say hi. And all this stuff, then makes some excuses and leaves the store. I pick up a few things and head back to the apartment, half expecting to see the guy from the 7-Eleven when I walk through the door. Only he's not there, and when I tell Daryl about how I saw one of his buddies in the store, he has no idea who I'm talking about. Even when I describe the guy in quite vivid detail, he has absolutely zero clue who I'm referring to. He starts reeling off names, asking if it was Deshaun or Robbie or Angelo, and it's then that I sort of realize that the guy haven't given me a name at all. Which is weird, right? I mean, I thought it was. You think the dude would have been like, tell him such and such said hi, or at least something like that. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but Daryl seemed just a little too freaked out by the encounter for my liking. And in the moments after I told him, he marches off into his bedroom and stays there for the rest of the evening, talking to someone, I'm guessing on the phone, in those same hushed tones that I was used to hearing. A few days after this, I'm walking back up towards the 7-Eleven to grab some milk for coffee when I see the same dude that hadn't given his name parked up at the side of the road. He calls out to me, greeting me and making chit-chat in that same warm way he had before again asking if Daryl was home. This time I straight up lie to him, telling him that, yeah, Daryl was home, only this time he was with a bunch of his friends playing 2K. He wasn't. He was actually out visiting family across the city, but there was something about this guy that I really didn't like. I quickly make an excuse telling him I had to go, and it was only then that this guy's demeanor started to change. He wasn't all smiles and laughs anymore. He just eyeballed me as I walked away, and he was still there when I walked back, just watching me as I walked towards our apartment. I should have seen it coming, and I feel like such an idiot for not knowing what I was headed for. But I guess in hindsight, it's always 2020. Because a couple of nights later, I was just about to catch some sleep when Daryl finally comes home from work. He seems a little shaken and asks me if anyone had called by the apartment that evening. I tell him no, it's been pretty quiet, but the answer doesn't satisfy him. He asks me if I've seen anyone at all, anyone hanging around the area that I didn't recognize. I'd already told him about the second encounter that I'd had with the 7-Eleven guy, and this time it had creeped him out even more. He asked if I'd seen that same guy at any point that evening, and I told him no, that I hadn't seen him since that weekday evening. I turned the whole thing around and asked him why he was so nervous about this, if anything had happened at work that evening, but he was his usual cagey self. He just retreated to his bedroom where he apparently went straight to sleep, which is exactly what I did too. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to this loud banging on the front door to our apartment. I had pretty much knew exactly what the deal was. Daryl had gone out to make a call, as he sometimes did at this time of night, and had left his keys in the apartment. This had happened a handful of times before, and I was honestly getting really sick of being woken up by it. I had suggested he actually put his car keys and apartment keys on the same key ring, but nope, apparently that meant if he lost one set, he lost both, which maybe was quite a smart idea in the long run, but that's beside the point. So I'm all bleary-eyed, shuffling toward the front door in my underwear and a t-shirt when he starts banging again. I'm like, all right, I'm coming. Stop with the banging, Jesus. Before I undo the deadbolts and open the door, I start saying something like, you really should just attach those freaking keys, when I see it's not Daryl at all. In fact, I have no idea who the guy at the door is, because he's wearing a freaking ski mask, and I have absolutely not the time or will to ask him, nor the other two idiots that he's with, because as soon as I open the door, he points a gun in my face, and then frog marches me back inside the apartment before locking the door behind them. The ski mask guy makes me kneel on the floor in the TV room and whispers to me that if I shout or anything, he's going to blow my brains out. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, more scared than I've ever been in my entire life. I had these uncontrollable shakes, like I had trouble just holding my head up. It was more comfortable for me to just rest my chin against my chest and pray that it'd all be over soon. This had a dual purpose too, because the last thing I saw before I did so and shut my eyes tight was one of the guys placing an empty plastic bottle of the muzzle on his pistol. Naive over something I was, yes, but I knew enough to know that this was some kind of ad hoc way to silence a shot. I didn't want to see what happened next, and I'm glad I didn't, because they burst into Daryl's room, and I heard the pop of that pistol as they shot him. I thought he was dead for a few minutes, like I was convinced that they just straight up executed him right there in his bed. And that was until they dragged him out of the bedroom, bleeding and cursing, and threw him down on the TV room floor a few meters away from me. The one guy kept his gun to the back of my head while they pretty much tortured Daryl right there in the TV room. One guy stamped on the bullet wound that he had, leaning on it with his sneaker, while the other forced his face into a couch cushion to muffle the screams. I mean, it was all obviously horrible what they were doing, and that was disturbing enough, but what really got me was how they seemed to enjoy the whole thing, how they seemed to take an immense amount of personal pleasure in causing us both as much pain and distress as was physically possible. It was like hearing Darrow's cries of pain was the funniest joke they'd ever heard, how the sight of his blood was the most fascinating, satisfying thing they'd ever seen. And it was then that it all came out. Like I said, you might have guessed what the deal was by now, but I pretty much had no idea back then. I was just so young and dumb. Daryl was a drug dealer and this was a robbery. So they beat the life out of him until he finally spoke up and told them where he kept his money in his stash. But I mean, for a while there, I thought they might have gotten the wrong place. Daryl flat out denied knowing what they were talking about and insisted that they got in the wrong place and how there was nothing to find there. But in the end, he broke and told them. They then took to clearing him out, and from what he told me, after he'd been discharged from the hospital for a fairly superficial gunshot wound to the shoulder, they'd taken him for about $20,000 plus. I had to cover Daryl's rent for a few months until he was well enough to get himself a real job. Turns out he was an actual college graduate with a business degree and was dealing in college to make a little money. When he graduated, the money came too easy that he just didn't bother to get a legit job. He wasn't a gangster. He just didn't have that kind of personality, which I suppose is what made him the perfect prey for the actual criminals that broke in that night. We got over what happened, but obviously Daryl still has this big old scar on his shoulder, a reminder of one of the worst nights of our lives, one that'll always be with us no matter where we go, or what we do, or who we become. Most people don't even believe me when I tell them, but I have a job where I work from home. People in my area mostly work with cars or in the medical industry. There aren't many jobs where I live. Thankfully, I was able to land a decent-paying job that let me work from my home office. It definitely comes with its struggles, but it is hands down the best job opportunity available to me right now. It isn't always perfect. It definitely comes with its pitfalls. Sometimes you have to sit at your computer even when there isn't any work to be done. It's also very easy to get distracted. But I think my biggest problem has to do with the house itself. It's kind of creepy. The house itself is an old Victorian, like really old. We're talking mid-1800s. A family friend owned the house and sold it to me for a very fair price, basically gave it to me. I was super excited because it meant I got a nice big house to live in by myself along with my girlfriend. I'm a natural loner and I don't really care for social interaction, so I had a nice big house all to myself and girlfriend and job where I work from home with very minimal social interaction with other people. That was basically my ideal life. But the house's age meant that it was going to be scary at times. And I don't mean with ghosts or anything like that, but sometimes I hear the house settling in or making noises that I can't explain. I've actually had quite a few instances where I'll be sitting down and doing some work and then out of nowhere, I hear a noise that I just can't rationalize. I go exploring throughout the house only to find that nothing has changed. It's as ominous as it is frustrating. I did just about what anyone else in the world would do. I started to use background noise to drown out the disturbances. First, I tried those quiet instrumentals on YouTube. You know, the ones that last 5 hours and they're supposed to put you at ease or something. It didn't really work for me because I couldn't get my computer to be loud enough to drown out all the noises. It was also not very good at keeping my attention. There was one week where my work was really slow and there wasn't a whole lot to do. I still had to sit at my computer though. There was an understanding that I was allowed to basically do anything I wanted as long as I was available to my coworkers if something came through that needed to be done. I didn't quite know what to do with this time and just started watching documentaries on YouTube. It was actually pretty fun. I learned a lot. And so that next week when things started picking up again, I just instinctively turned on a documentary. I wouldn't be able to have all of my focus on it, but it was a lot better than having some ambient noise. It actually helped distract me from the sounds of the house. I guess I just didn't have enough mental focused energy to notice any of the other sounds going on around me, if that makes any sense. Well, it had been about 2 weeks of me watching documentaries while I worked. Everything seemed to be good. Until one Friday morning, I started work at 8 and this must have been around 10. I was sitting at my office chair working while I listened to a documentary about certain conspiracy theories, when all of a sudden, I heard an abrupt banging noise coming from upstairs. Like I had said, I hadn't been distracted by any noises for a while by this point, so the fact that I noticed this noise meant that it was probably serious. My fight or flight kicked in. You might laugh at me, but when I work, I keep a knife next to me. I ran upstairs with the knife and looked around for any suspicious noises. The banging had stopped and I didn't know where it had come from. I knew what section of the house that I heard it from, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. I stood there for a few moments and then I heard it again. It happened right on the other side of my door. I immediately braced myself for there to be some kind of animal or something trying to get in. I didn't really know what to expect. I opened my door to see that the screen door had not been properly closed. My girlfriend didn't close it all the way when she left for work that morning. It was also pretty windy that day, so it was just going back and forth causing a banging noise when the wind got bad. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I didn't want to live my life in constant paranoia and fear of some kind of attacker coming into my home. We live in a safe area. There's never been a serious threat. And I have run around my house with a knife way too many times now. I honestly felt kind of stupid, so I made a decision. I was no longer going to assume that someone was breaking in if and when I heard a sound. I put the knife in my dresser in my bedroom and decided that I was going to just be in to work while I was working, except for my documentary, of course. So there I was the next week. It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my office doing exactly what I had set out to do. I was working, ignoring the noises and listening to a documentary. I remembered the exact part of the documentary I was on when I heard it. The sound was the loudest sound I had heard in the house up to that point. At first, I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I need to fight against this paranoia. The sound continued, and I couldn't take my mind off of it. After about 5 minutes of listening to what sounded like rummaging and walking, I went upstairs to check. Bear in mind, I didn't have any weapon on me, and I was expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. When I got to my kitchen, I saw that the front door was wide open. The cabinets were all open, and there was a strange man rummaging through my stuff. I didn't notice until after the fact, but he had been eating something. I remember screaming at him. I don't remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "What are you doing in my house?" obviously. Then he just ran off. Didn't say a single word. He took a loaf of bread with him, but I don't think he took anything else, other than what I had eaten before I came upstairs. I reasoned with myself that he must have been some sort of homeless man or something. I don't know why else he would steal a loaf of bread from a very ordinary-looking house. And this was the worst thing that could have happened. On some instinctual level, it had proved all of my worst fears right. There was some kind of danger in my house, and of course, it was the one time when I didn't have my knife on me. I lucked out that he didn't try to hurt me or anything, but it's still horrifying to see nonetheless. I just work at a local coffee shop now. It's honestly my only way to stay sane.